Welcome into the Frog Factor podcast. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I want to get to a lot of different things today. The Big 12, we said before the year, thought this was a wide open conference through the first 2 weeks. I think that's even more true than it was before the season started. Arizona State goes on the road to Mississippi State. They lose that ball game on a last second touchdown. Kenny Dillingham squad, tough loss there. Kansas State loses to Army. Iowa State looks good so far. Texas Tech looks good so far. Baylor, a really bipolar first couple of weeks. Defensively, they're struggling a lot. Offensively, they look elite, but they are 1-1 after upset. Well, upset. I mean, they beat SMU. I don't know how much of an upset it was. They had a big comeback, though. We're down 14 points with about 8 minutes left. Forced overtime, won that ball game. Where does TCU fit in all of that? It's the first home weekend of the year, game at the Carter this Saturday night against Abilene Christian. But we start today. Some news on the injury front, some good news. One of the transfers that I was really excited about going into the season, LSU tight end Camorian Pimpton, former LSU tight end Camorian Pimpton. He played his high school ball at North Crowley, so he's a local kid. This dude just physically is a large person. He is 6'6", 242 pounds. And in high school, you saw him line up in a lot of different places. I mean, he played tight end, but I think the exciting thing about Camorian's game is that you can put him in the slot. He really is, when you talk about the modern tight end position, guys who are just big, physical, can go make plays in the passing game, almost like wide receivers. That's the type of possibilities he brings to this offense. Now, you might wonder, if you've looked at his stat line, hey, why are you excited about this guy? He's got 79 yards receiving in 2 years. Pretty much all of that was in 2024 on 6 receptions. Well, it's twofold. For one, I just think there's a lot of upside with what he can do, right? And I know a couple years back, like, you might be wary of what we would call, this isn't the nicest term, but it just is what it is, blue blood washout transfers. And what I mean by that is, after TCU went on that crazy run and made it to the national championship game, they went after a lot of players who were at big name programs. It didn't work out. And then after it didn't work out, they end up at TCU. Who am I talking about? JoJo Earl, Alabama wide receiver. He was an Alito kid, very highly recruited player. Didn't play a lot of Alabama. He ends up at TCU. It never clicked. Dealt with some injuries. When he was on the field, he wasn't super productive. He's now at UNLV. Tommy Brockermeyer was at one time, I think, the number 2 rated player in the country out of high school. Just sort of out of the box, like from a physical frame standpoint, what you want from a left tackle. Looked like a cornerstone player. Goes to Alabama. Didn't work out. Comes to TCU. Has to medically retire after a few years. Again, not his fault, but another dude that didn't play a whole lot. I mean, Timon Mitchell actually did play a lot at the nose tackle position, coming over from Georgia a few years back. Never totally clicked in the way of like reaching his full potential. Jalen Robinson, not a perfect comp because he had a very productive season at UCF. Then he went to Auburn, dealt with injuries there, came to TCU, and never worked out. Okay, that whole class really had a lot of guys that were sort of in that same category. Local kids who went to big name programs. It didn't happen there, so they end up at TCU. And unfortunately, even at TCU, it didn't work. The reason I think Camorian's different, he's still really young. I mean, he's headed into his junior year, but he only spent 2 seasons at LSU. LSU, he sort of lost his spot at the tight end position because they had another player who took his place and was just more physically inclined. And what I mean by that is, like, the Locked On LSU host told me when I interviewed him, when both Pimpton and Kylan Jackson came over, he was like, Brian Kelly, he really likes his tight ends to be inline blockers who also catch the football. But priority number 1 is, can you line up with your hand in the ground in the run game and drive people off the ball. TCU wants guys like that too. The good news is I think they have a couple players that are willing to do that right now at the tight end position. DJ Rogers, who had a really good first game of the season, 5 receptions, 43 yards, 1 touchdown. Chase Curtis, who rotated in and out a little bit, and I think Chase is an important player. Before the season started, I had planned on doing actually a segment about him, but then with the transition I had with the podcast, it didn't happen. But I feel like Chase is one of those guys that you have to have on your team because he's just willing to do the dirty work, for lack of a better term. Like, he's fine being a physical presence at that tight end spot and that being his main job. And with this TCU team, there's a big emphasis on getting better in the run game. I think Chase Curtis helps them accomplish that goal. But he can also catch passes. And we saw a few years back against SMU, he sealed the victory catching a ball from Chandler Morris and taking it to the house. Like, when he gets the ball in his hands, he's not a statue. Like, he can make plays. But his main job is going to be having a physical presence on this offense. So going back to Camorian Pimpton, the reason I'm excited about him is I think he can be a weapon, especially in the red zone. And because you have other players that fill different roles within that tight end room, I believe Kendall Briles can even like line him up in different formations and different spots and match him up one-on-one against safeties and linebackers and allow him to go to work. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but it can be, here and there as a change of pace and another piece of the puzzle to this offense. Because DJ Rogers, it might sound like a kind of pedestrian stat line, 5 catches, 43 yards, and a touchdown. But last year, Drake Dabney, who was their big tight end transfer, he had 193 yards receiving on 19 catches and 0 touchdowns. So Rogers is already on pace to like obliterate that production. And, last year they didn't really necessarily need a lot of help from the tight end in the passing game because you had so many good wide receivers. But this season, I just think it's an added dimension of this offense that you can work the middle of the field more. And part of that's going to be with Joseph Manjack out of the slot, but another part of it's going to be with your tight ends. And Pimpton is a guy that when he was at his best, as a 4-star, like this was a top 10 tight end in the nation coming out of high school. He was a matchup nightmare for other teams. And I believe he can accomplish that and fill that role for this TCU offense. And you can still have DJ Rogers and Chase Curtis kind of be your main players at that position. But Jeremy Clark was the one that reported this. I should have said that at the beginning. I apologize. He reported that Pimpton was back in practice on Thursday. So he missed most of fall camp, or he missed all of fall camp, honestly. And he missed the first week of, practice for the UNC game. But as the bye week was wrapping up last week, he returned to practice and he becomes another weapon that this offense can use and have at their disposal. Is he going to play against ACU? I don't know. I mean, in some ways, I think it would be the perfect game to sort of get him acclimated back into what they want to do and introduce him for the first time into this TCU program. At the same time, you got a big game coming up against SMU next week. But especially if you got to a big lead, I would say, yeah, give this guy the chance to get out there and make some plays, catch the football, make some things happen so that he'll be ready down the line as the games get more important. And it's really exciting to me. Last week we had sort of questioned all off season, okay, what's it going to look like when the game actually kicks off as far as who are going to be the guys that make plays at those skill positions? Because there was a lot of potential, but there weren't necessarily a ton of defined roles. So we can say pretty clearly right now, Camorian Barnes is your starting running back. Like, he's the guy that's going to get the lion's share of the carries. And Jeremy Payne is a factor. I think Nate Palmer showed some good things. Even John Denman got in there and made some things happen when he was available on Monday night. But Barnes will be the one that gets most of the work. Jordan Dwyer, a great compliment to Eric McAllister. I don't know if that'll be his role every week where he's like essentially wide receiver number 1 because they decided to shadow and slide a safety over to McAllister's side. But Dwyer stepped up in a huge way. McAllister will get more involved as the season goes on. Manjack is another guy who's going to make plays. So those are your main three. And now that you've established that, you can start to work in and mix and match. Okay, if Ed Small is still making plays in practice, we can start to integrate him in this offense to a certain extent. If Jacoby Hayes, the freshman from Midlothian, almost forgot there, if he's continues to just kind of force his way up the depth chart, we can allow him to get some reps in and get some plays in, and he can make plays within this offense. Jordan Bailey, right? So now DJ Rogers and Chase Curtis, if they're sort of established as your 1-2 punch at the tight end spot, and depending on your personnel packages and just how your offense is functioning, what the situation is, what you want to do offensively, is how you rotate those guys in and out. Well, then now you can work off that and say, okay, where do we have opportunities to allow a guy like Camorian Pimpton, who creates matchup problems, to come in and make plays for us, and just give Josh Hoover another player that he can be comfortable with. Because one thing I love about Josh, I know for receivers might get frustrated about this at times, and I do think there's a time where you have to sort of not force the ball, but you have to make a concerted effort to make sure your big-time playmakers are getting adequate opportunities. But he's not afraid to spread the ball around. I mean, he wasn't forcing the ball there at McAllister last week when Bill Belichick said, hey, I'm just not going to let this guy beat me, right? It's like, okay, let's just change the calculus a little bit. We'll go to Dwyer instead. It was just immediate. Like, I'm not going to spin my wheels and waste my time trying to force it over here if this works. So he's there to make good decisions. He's going to make those decisions well. And I think that's a huge key for how this offense is going to function moving forward. But Camorian Pimpton could be available as early as this week against Abilene Christian. We'll see what happens. I think, the most optimistic news, though, is that he's healthy. And now you can start to think, how can we get him involved in this offense? Okay, transitioning a little bit. The Big 12. I watched a lot of Big 12 football this weekend, as I'm sure you did too, because, hey, TCU wasn't on, or maybe you were doing yard work or spending time with the kids. That's great too. But I watched a lot of SMU Baylor, 11 a.m. kick. Baylor, a furious comeback. So this league feels wide open to me. And specifically when we talk about Baylor, I think through 2 weeks, we have a pretty good idea of who this team is because they've played good opponents. I mean, they played Auburn. They lost that game. They end up winning against SMU. They have a great offense. I would say they have a borderline elite offense with Bryson Washington and Sawyer Robertson, who I don't have the stat line in front of me, but I think he's thrown for almost 800 yards already. Hasn't thrown a pick yet. Has been putting the ball in the end zone. Josh Cameron, preseason All-American wide receiver, looks the part so far. As much as I hate to say it, that's a team that can score. Defensively, they can't stop a nosebleed, which is very strange because Dave Aranda, their head coach, is a defensive-minded guy. He was a defensive coordinator at LSU when they won a national championship. That's his reputation. That's who he is. But they cannot figure out this defense. Now, to their credit, they got some key stops. I mean, they were down 38-24. They got a couple stops against SMU when they had to. They got a stop in overtime when they had to and ended up winning that football game. But, man, that looks like a group that is just good on one side of the ball right now. And they are one of many teams that going into the season, you felt like, okay, this is a team that has a chance to be in Arlington and win a Big 12 championship. There's some vulnerabilities there. Colorado, they lose the first game to Georgia Tech. Now, they did bounce back this week and win against Delaware. I think they're still figuring out that quarterback position. Caden Salter got some opportunities, but Julian Lewis, their true freshman that they love, he also is a talented player that they've given some snaps or gave some snaps in that game against Delaware. But that's a talented team that I think's finding their way. They don't look like a Big 12 championship caliber team right now. Okay? Kansas lost to Missouri. Man, the Big 12 against the SEC. Killing us, guys. Baylor getting beat by Auburn at home. Kansas was up 21-6 on Mizzou, I believe, in that ball game. And then things sort of fell apart on them. The teams that look impressive so far, to me, Iowa State, They beat K-State in Dublin. They come back and handle their business against South Dakota. They won an ugly game against Iowa, but that's a classic rivalry game. It's always a defensive rock fight. And bottom line is they hung in there and they won the ball game. And I think Rocco Becht is a really good QB. And he looks very in control to me right now. Texas Tech has not played good competition so far, but they look very in control. I mean, offensively, they're scoring almost every time they touch the ball. They played Kent State and Arkansas Pine Bluff. I understand. We'll get a better idea of who they are when they take on Oregon State this week. But that looks like a team that's doing what they're supposed to do against bad competition. And they haven't shown me anything so far that makes me doubt that they're not a good football team. Oklahoma State, TCU doesn't play them, so not super interested in talking about them for a long time, but woof. They lose 69-3 to Oregon. I think we're entering the end of the Mike Gundy era. And I know they were close to parting ways at the end of last season. It looks like they probably should have gone ahead and done that. Apparently Mike talked him into sticking around. I don't see a lot of hope there at the moment. They got destroyed by obviously a really good Oregon team, but it was not competitive at all. Utah looks good. You know, they went and got a quarterback in the offseason, Dan Pierre from New Mexico. Again, a team that hasn't played great competition, but they destroyed UCLA, who I know lost to UNLV this week, but they destroyed UCLA. They took care of their business against Cal Poly. I think that defense is good. I think they're physical. The other team I would throw in the mix right now, as far as teams I'm concerned about as it relates to TCU, and by the way, TCU's played one game. I'm not here declaring that they're great. That was an impressive win to me against North Carolina, not because they beat North Carolina, but because of the way they did it. I'm still nervous about BYU. I know a lot of people wrote them off after Retzlaff transferred, but they have a formula to win. They know what their identity is. They're going to play physical. They're going to play good defense. And they have a young quarterback who I believe will improve as the year goes on. I still think that's going to be a really difficult game on the road. I said before the season started, I thought that was going to be the toughest game on TCU's schedule. I might hedge on that a little bit, but some people, like some TCU fans, kind of came at me after Retzlaff left, and they were like, well, that's going to be an easy game now. I don't see that. I still think that's a good BYU team with a clear identity, and I think that's half the battle when you're talking about college football, just a program that buys in and knows what they're good at and sticks to it. I think that's a big part of success in college football. But my point being, the Big 12 looks wide open right now. And I saw a number of TCU fans on social media saying similar things. I don't know if the league's bad, but a number of the teams that we sort of like before the season started thought, okay, this could be a good to great team. They've had some hiccups early in the year. Now, hopefully we don't find anything out about TCU this week, because I think the only way we would is if they struggle mightily and then you're like, oh, what the heck happened? But there's opportunity here for the Frogs. As early as it is, I mean, you can see there's some issues that teams are working through right now, and TCU has a chance to be a really good football team. The last thing I'll say about the Big 12, Kansas State loses to Army. Army, you know, they run that triple option. They dominated time of possession in the second half. Avery Johnson threw a pick late. It was tipped off his running back, but he threw a pick late and Army sealed it. I don't know. I usually do a top 5 most important games of TCU's football season before the season starts. I already know what the most important game of 2026 is. I can tell you right now, today. I can tell you right now the game that will make or break TCU season in 2026. When they go to Dublin, Ireland to play North Carolina in their season opener. Because the last 2 years, Florida State, who lost in Dublin to Georgia Tech and then went on to win 2 games, Kansas State, they go on the road, they are, overseas to play Iowa State, they lose that game. They come back, they have to have a miracle finish against North Dakota to win that ball game. Then they lose to Army. Now they're traveling to Arizona on a Friday night in a game that Arizona's suddenly favored in. Man, Sonny Dykes and the squad better be ready in that season opener next year. And I'm optimistic because they handled their business this season. I do think North Carolina's going to be a better team next year. I'll just say you better be ready to play, because if you lose that ball game, there is evidence that it is very tough to bounce back from the disappointment of that and the travel of that. All that combined makes it difficult. So get ready to play and be ready for that season opener next year, because if you lose it, things could go downhill very quickly. Mando Frog hit me up on X over the weekend and asked me a hypothetical that I wanted to talk about before we wrap things up here on this Monday. He said, question for the public. Here in the crazy world we live in, if Gundy gets fired after the season at Oklahoma State and Josh Hoover after an amazing season goes to the NFL, does Dykes call Haas Haney for a return to TCU? Okay. Well, a lot of ifs and buts there, but the short answer I think is no. I don't feel like they would circle back with Haas. That question did make me think, though, about an interesting scenario. I'm not sure what the coaching staff thinks about it, but this offseason, one reason why I was excited about TCU in the future was I felt like there was a good possibility you could have Josh for 2 more years, like this year and next year. It's one game. There's a lot of ball to be played. But I'm starting to wonder. It feels like Josh is getting some national buzz and getting some more attention from NFL scouts. If he leaves at the end of the season, TCU has a very interesting decision to make. Do they go with young Adam Schobel, who would be a true sophomore, redshirt freshman? Or do you hit the transfer portal? Because, again, I don't know what they're preparing for, but you have to start considering the possibility that Josh might be gone. And what does that mean for you at the quarterback position? It's just an intriguing dynamic. Now, Schobel will be basically the same age as Josh when he started, coming off Chandler Morris's injury, if that all played out that way. But it's something the coaching staff have to think about. To answer your question, though, Mando Frog, no, I don't think they would circle back and call Haas. I feel like that, both everybody went their separate ways, and that's the end of that. But as you said, it's a crazy world in college football, so you can't be sure. Abilene Christian this week, what are you looking for? For me, the main thing is, how focused are you? You've had a couple weeks to get yourself ready mentally. Come out and put your foot on the gas pedal and go put this game away early. Abilene Christian last year in their season opener against Texas Tech pushed Tech to the limit. They lost 52-51. Now, Maverick McIvor was their quarterback, and he was a former Tech QB, and he's now at Western Kentucky. But this is a experienced Abilene Christian team. They've got a lot of 4th and 5th year seniors who have played. You look up and down their roster, it's like transfer from Texas Tech, transfer from North Texas, a number of FBS former players up and down this roster. But this is a game where TCU should handle their business and be comfortable. So I think the main thing is, can you come out focused and play hard and play with intensity? And also, I just want to see these young guys play. Like, let's get some of these young wide receivers looks. I'd love to see Ken Seals and Adam Schobel both get opportunities to snap the football and run this offense. But that's all about, can you put it away early so they can do that? I'd like to see a heavy dose of John Denman, the freshman running back, see what he's about, right? All of that is exciting and intriguing to me. And we'll have plenty of coverage all week long here on Locked On Horned Frogs. I did it again. Here on the Frog Factor podcast. Old habits die hard, everybody. I'm sorry. I'm Steven Simcox. I'll be back Wednesday. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day, everybody.